This is China. It's roughly the same size as the United States, but about a third of its entire landmass is mountains. To the southwest, you've got the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau sitting at 15,000 feet. To the north and west, the Gobi Desert and the Taklamakan, nicknamed the Sea of Death. To the east, nearly 9,000 miles of coastline. China has been described as essentially a geographic island, not because it's surrounded by water, but because it's surrounded by terrain that's nearly impossible to cross in virtually every direction. For the 3,700 years or so of recorded Chinese history, they've only been completely conquered twice by foreign powers. By the Mongols in 1279 after a 74-year effort, and the Manchus in 1683 after 65 years of conquest. But here's the thing. Every successful invasion required either the most powerful military machine in human history, the complete internal collapse of the ruling dynasty, or literal betrayal from within. And now we're in completely different times. The China of today is a different beast. It's the second most populated country in the world with over 1 billion people, and the second strongest and richest country in the world, only behind America. So what is it about China that makes it impossible to invade today? Well, to understand that, let's start by walking around the perimeter. Because China's been described as essentially a geographic island, not because it's surrounded by water, but because it's surrounded by terrain that's nearly impossible to cross in virtually any direction. To the southwest, the Himalayas are the highest mountain range on Earth. Mount Everest sits on the China-Nepal border at roughly 29,000 feet. Behind them, the Tibetan Plateau, known as the Roof of the World, sits at an average elevation of 16,500 feet in its western portion, making it the highest region on the planet. As long as Tibet remains in Chinese hands, India's effectively on the other side of the moon from any military conflict with China. During the 1962 Sino-Indian Border War, the People's Liberation Army, or PLA for short, found that even their own logistics were nearly impossible because the terrain was so impassable for conventional supply lines. If China's own military struggled to operate there, imagine what an invading force would face. And today, China has built the Qinghai-Tibet Railway to over 16,000 feet above sea level, the highest railway on Earth. China can move troops and supplies to its Tibetan border faster than any adversary can stage an attack from the other side. To the north and west, you've got the Gobi and the Taklamakan deserts. The Gobi is mostly bare rock, nearly impassable for ancient armies, and the 5th largest desert in the world, while the Taklamakan is the 2nd largest shifting sand desert in the world. Poisonous snakes, constant sandstorms, boiling days, and freezing nights are all encompassing here. To the south, where China meets Vietnam, Laos, and Myanmar, it's dense jungle and hilly terrain. The only readily traversable frontier for large armies is the border with Vietnam. During World War II, the United States struggled just to build the Lido Road through Burma to reconnect with supply routes into China's Yunnan province, and that effort alone became legendary for its difficulty. To the northeast, Manchuria is the exception, the most accessible terrain on China's entire perimeter. The Da-Hingan Mountains run along its western edge. But the interior is relatively flat, making it the one border where a large-scale conventional ground approach is physically plausible. But China knows this, so it's where the PLA stations its heaviest armor and conventional forces. And finally, to the east, nearly 9,000 miles of coastline. Historically, this has been the most vulnerable point. But even here, geography works against an invader. The Taiwan Strait alone, just 100 miles wide, averages 3 to 4 typhoons a year and has such severe winds, wave swells, and fog for half the year that viable invasion windows shrink to roughly 2 months, April and October. Even then though, this attack would be obvious in advance. But here's what a lot of people don't realize. China didn't just happen to be surrounded by these barriers. It expanded to them on purpose. Tibet, Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, these aren't just provinces, they're the shield. Over 90% of China's 1.4 billion people live in roughly 40% of the landmass, concentrated along the coast and the river valleys of the east. The remaining 60%, the mountains, deserts, and plateaus, serve as the buffer zone. An invading force would have to cross hundreds or thousands of miles of some of the harshest terrain on Earth before reaching the populated heartland. But let's say, hypothetically, that an army got through, punched through the border, landed on the coast, or found a gap somewhere. You'd think that the hard part was over, but it's actually just getting started. There is a common misconception that China's internal geography is smooth, which supposedly explains why it unified into a single civilization while Europe stayed fragmented. But that's not accurate. China's terrain is as broken as Europe's, divided by the Taihang Mountains, the Qingling Mountains, and the enormous Sichuan Basin. The Yangtze River, nearly 4,000 miles long and the third longest in the world, has served for millennia as a massive natural north-south defensive barrier. China controls every bridge and every crossing point along it. Those can be demolished in minutes, and during monsoon season, the river swells to the point where even modern bridging equipment struggles. But the Yangtze isn't the only line. The Yellow River runs east-west across northern China, creating a second layered barrier hundreds of miles to the north. The two rivers together, connected by the Grand Canal, form an inland waterway network spanning the country. If coastal ports are blockaded, that network absorbs the logistics load. An invader doesn't just face rivers, they face a country that can reroute its entire supply chain around a blockade. Then there's the Sichuan Basin, home to over 100 million people today, ringed by mountains on every side with only a few narrow points of entry. During World War II, the Republic of China moved its wartime capital to Chongqing, deep inside the basin, because it was simply unreachable by the Japanese. Then Chairman Mao Zedong's doctrine, laid out in his 1938 work on protracted war, explained exactly why this happened. Trade space for time, stretch supply lines, close guerrilla forces around the flanks. The deeper Japan pushed, the more it was swallowed. Given its sheer size and population density, China simply couldn't be subdued in totality. Now, this cultural dimension matters enormously in any modern scenario. The century of humiliation, the period from 1839 to 1949 when Western and Japanese powers carved up Chinese territory through unequal treaties and military occupation, isn't some distant historical footnote. It's the defining national wound, taught in every school, referenced by every Chinese leader. Any foreign army on Chinese soil today wouldn't fracture the population. It would unify them into the most motivated fighting force on the planet. With a total available manpower pool of roughly 626 million people fit for military service, 1.4 billion people defending their homeland is a different kind of deterrent than any mountain range. Now, if all this wasn't enough, China has spent the last 60 years building defense systems that most people don't even know exist. There are 3 layers to it. The first is the hidden industrial base. Starting in 1964, Mao launched what's called the Third Front Movement, a secret campaign to relocate roughly 400 state-owned factories from vulnerable coastal cities into hidden mountain complexes deep in China's interior. The guiding principle was to build close to mountains, keep facilities dispersed, and hide everything. Nuclear weapons production, aerospace facilities, and electronics manufacturing all moved underground or into remote valleys. By 1980, inland China produced more than half of the country's electronics. The whole campaign was kept secret from the Chinese public until 1978. Beyond logistics, China is self-sufficient in ways most countries aren't. It controls 95% of the world's rare earth supply chains alone, the materials inside every advanced weapon system, every guidance chip, every communication device. It leads global output in steel, cement, and aluminum. It feeds 1.4 billion people on roughly 9% of the world's arable land. An invader banking on economic strangulation, cutting off trade, blocking imports, faces a country that has spent 60 years engineering around exactly that vulnerability. China's used to being sanctioned by the West, and as a result, it's learned to develop everything it's needed by itself, from semiconductors to artificial intelligence. The second layer is the underground Great Wall. This is a tunnel network stretching over 3,000 miles, some sections reportedly 3,300 feet deep, used by the PLA rocket force to conceal and deploy nuclear-armed intercontinental ballistic missiles. Construction began in 1985. The Pentagon's 2023 report on Chinese military power confirmed that China has thousands of underground facilities and constructs more every year. No first strike can eliminate China's ability to retaliate. China surpassed 600 operational nuclear warheads as of mid-2024, more than doubling its arsenal since 2019, and is projected to exceed 1,000 by 2030. The third layer is the mobilization machine. China's National Defense Mobilization Law of 2010 gives the government legal authority to requisition any civilian asset in a crisis. China's got the world's largest active military at roughly 2 million personnel, and the world's largest navy. Its shipbuilding capacity is estimated at 230 times greater than that of the United States. Just one Chinese shipyard, Jiangnan on Changxing Island, has greater capacity than all American shipyards combined, which is insane. Not to mention, China has the world's largest high-speed rail network, over 29,000 miles of track, explicitly engineered to military specifications. The PLA can requisition it instantly. Troops, weapons, and supplies can move from one end of the country to the other in hours. This is the real advantage of defending China: interior lines. The defender moves across a transportation network. The attacker basically moves across an entire continent slowly. Then there's the cyber aspect. China's offensive cyber capabilities can cripple an invader's logistics, communications, and command infrastructure before a single ship reaches the coast. Operations like Volt Typhoon, a Chinese government-linked cyber campaign, have already demonstrated the ability to burrow into American critical infrastructure. Lastly, there's something that doesn't appear on any map: the government setup. The Chinese Communist Party has political committees embedded in every factory, every university, every institution across the country. The surveillance infrastructure gives the state real-time visibility over population movement at a scale no other government has achieved. The Great Firewall means an invader can't run an information war against the Chinese population the way the US did in Iraq or Afghanistan. There's no accessible channel. And unlike a democracy, there's no election cycle creating political pressure to negotiate or withdraw. A government that can direct resources, mobilize populations, and sustain a war economy without a vote is a different kind of adversary. State capacity is a force multiplier on everything else. Now at this point, you might be wondering about the Great Wall of China. Was it actually useful? Well, the Great Wall isn't a single wall. It's a 13,000-mile defensive system spanning over 2,000 years, and a beacon-fire communication network that could relay warnings across hundreds of miles almost instantly. It functioned as a cavalry barrier, a troop highway, a communication system, and a trade control mechanism all at once. But here's the thing: the Great Wall existed because of a real vulnerability: the Northern Steppe, where horse-mounted armies could ride straight into the heartland. It was the one gap in the perimeter. China actually has a similar gap today, just in a different form. It's called the Malacca Dilemma. China imports roughly 10 to 11 million barrels of oil daily, with about 65% flowing through the Strait of Hormuz and the Strait of Malacca, maritime choke points controlled by other navies. A blockade could strangle China's economy without a single soldier ever touching Chinese soil. But China's closing this gap the same way it closed the Northern Steppe, by building its way out. Overland pipelines to Russia and Central Asia now bypass the sea entirely. Russian crude imports via pipeline have grown from roughly 300,000 barrels per day in 2010 to about 1.5 million by 2025. And massive renewable energy deployment has pushed installed wind and solar capacity to over 1,400 gigawatts as of 2024, exceeding coal capacity for the first time. But there's a second vulnerability that can't be engineered away. Taiwan sits 100 miles off China's eastern coast, directly in front of the most densely populated, economically concentrated part of the country. China's entire defensive architecture is built to push adversaries back hundreds of miles from that coastline. Taiwan, as a willing launchpad for a hostile power, collapses that buffer entirely. It's a national security concern for them on top of all the other reasons China wants to own Taiwan. These are really the two major weaknesses China has today. So who would actually try to invade China? Well, the honest answer is no one. Not because China's liked, but because the math doesn't work. Russia and North Korea would also come to their side if, say, the US tried to do anything. But realistically, it'd be impossible to conquer regardless. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.